Hello, and welcome to Leadership in Turbulent Times. I'm Robert Bell, Executive Director of Space and Satellite Professionals International, which is the largest membership association in the business. In the next 2 hours, we're going to explore excellence in leading teams and organizations in a world that grows more unpredictable by the year, pandemic or no pandemic. We're going to do it in the company of extraordinary people. They are members of the Space and Satellite Hall of Fame, which since 1987 has been honoring people in this industry whose careers transform life on planet Earth for the better. We'll also hear from members of the 20 under 35, our annual list of employees and entrepreneurs aged 35 and under who have already achieved much and who represent what is quite simply the best of us in the years ahead. Now, it's rewarding to recognize talent, whether in an industry veteran or someone with just a few years of experience. But beyond a feel-good moment, these programs serve a serious purpose. For decades, the space and satellite industry grew slowly and had little trouble finding qualified people to hire. Some companies literally went years without expanding their headcounts. But all that has changed. We are now in a business marked by fast growth, big technology changes, major investments in future possibilities, and sharp dislocations as business models come under pressure. Turbulent times indeed. And our ability to attract and develop our share of the world's best talent has become critical to our success. And turning those talented people into tomorrow's leaders, well, that's job one. That's why recognizing talent has become so important, and it's one of the ways that Sspi contributes to the growth of commercial space and satellite. Today, we bring together some award-winning people from both ends of the career life cycle to exchange ideas, to challenge each other, and to find common ground. And we, who get to listen in on these conversations, will gain a deeper understanding of what it means to lead in a high-pressure, complex technology sector where there is little room for error and where the future increasingly depends on the innovations we introduce today. Now, my thanks go to two companies that have stepped forward to support the Leadership in Turbulent Times series. They are Artel, which has provided secure network communication services and network integration to federal government agencies for 30 years, and AVL Technologies, which designs, develops, and produces mobile satellite antennas and positioner systems for internet access, disaster relief, news gathering, oil and gas, and defense and homeland security customers around the world. So to get us started, I'm pleased to introduce Sspi's Director of Innovation, Lou Zakarilla, to moderate our first panel. Lou?
Thank you, Robert, and good morning or good afternoon, everyone, wherever you are. We're going to start today by talking about the past a little bit, and then going into this exciting future that Robert described. Once upon a time, the space and satellite industry consisted of niches with pretty high barriers to entry. Competition was relatively mild and change seemed almost leisurely. We used to actually talk about ourselves as a collegial bunch. The 26 billion US that have been invested in the sector since 2009 and all of the innovations and market needs that are being satisfied have changed that. The disruptors have breached the barriers, they're over the gates, and they're among us. And we think that's a good thing, and we're pretty convinced that it is. But through competition, we've seen a more fierce climate, new technologies advance at record speed. The industry is seeing partnerships, cross investments, cooperations, people in the industry that never could even understand what satellite was or what it did for them before that. So with all of that as background, in this panel, we've got two members of the Hall of Fame who are people who have originated concepts that became business models, very exciting ones, very transformative ones, and two of our 20 under 35 cohort to answer questions about some of the things that they've been doing. And so what we're going to try to give you a sense of is how the industry ecosystem has taken root. and I think you'll enjoy this morning's 30-minute conversation. I'm not going to go into long introductions with regard to our panel. You can read about them, but we've got Richard Hatzel, who's the Vice President of Global Network Operations for Kymeta, a Hall of Famer. Henry Goldberg, who is also a Hall of Famer and a partner at Goldberg, Godfreys, Weiner, and Wright. And Joost van Oorschot, who's the founder and CEO of Mana Electric. And Ott van Oppen, who is the manager of strategic partnerships for Kymeta. That's Kate, I'm sorry. Let me get started with a general question. The description that I just gave you in these notes basically assumes that disruptors have breached the barriers and in fact inside the walls. First of all, Henry, do you agree with that? Or are there still people out there that we need to let in?
Well, there are always more to come in, but I certainly agree with the statement. Going back in time for when satellite technology first burst on the scene in the 1960s, the technology itself was very disruptive. Initially, it was put in the hands of carriers like Intelsat, Comsat, in the old days, Western Union, but some very crazy people saw the disruptive possibilities of it and got into the act. There was Ted Turner, Renee Anselmo with Pan Amsat, Brian Lamb with C-SPAN, and they shaped the technology to be disruptive. And so the walls were breached way back then, and they're being breached today. I mean, with the LEO constellations that we have, just look who's in charge of the LEO constellations. The very definition of disruption. You have Elon Musk, you have Jeff Bezos, you have Greg Weiler, and you have my son, Dan Goldberg at Telesat, even though Telesat has been around for a while. People don't think Dan has been disruptive. They didn't grow up with him when he was a teenager. So,
so you've got a relative over the wall too. That's interesting.
Yeah. So it's, to me, satellite technology and the entrepreneurs who were drawn to satellite technology going back decades, but also now and into the future, disruptive.
Yeah. Richard, I'm going to stay with you for this segment as well. But, in addition to yourself, which we'll talk a little bit about in a few seconds, is there an example from your experience, say, since 2009, that illustrates for you the breadth and depth of this disruption that we've seen? Something that just stands out?
Well, for me, actually looking back into the 2009 arena at MTN during those early days where, we had our niche in the maritime mobility industry, and we had a lot of capacity running around the world. And we were looking for other mobility functionalities to utilize said capacity. We stumbled upon Panasonic and looking for a way to get out of just the IFE business and get into the communications side of it. And we offered them the ability to use their old Melco parabola antenna that was sitting up on top of the large aircraft of Lufthansa, and we put them on our KU-band maritime network, and we were very successful to maintain their services on our MTN maritime network, which at the time we didn't think we were going to be able to do successfully without really increasing overall bandwidth. But knock on wood, it worked out well. And then immediately, following that, all those parabolas started to disappear. And lo and behold, Panasonic started making deals with companies like Starlink out of Israel to make little 45 centimeter flat panels. And here we go again. We're coming from a parabola world of 1 meter, 1.2, 1.8, 2.4 meters, that everybody in the industry is used to.
Right.
And all of a sudden, you have this little square piece of cardboard, it looks like, and here they are up and operating. So I saw that as the next step, in the world of mobility and satellite communications that was going to really take the industry by storm. And I kept looking to see what's coming next, because although it was a flat panel and you still had to have it gimbaled somewhat to point it, there was always a thought that there should be a way to electronically steer that and get away from all the moving parts. So to me, that was the next event that I really kept focused on over the years, and watched the various companies slowly migrating in that direction. And hence, ultimately is where I ended up.
Yeah, but it's interesting, and I'm going to bring Just in this as well. But for you, it sounds like it's kind of an evolution of innovation. I mean, you created a new technology. I mean, just to go backwards, for you, it was the motion stabilized maritime antenna at MTN. I mean, that was an enormous breakthrough. And I've always wanted to ask you two questions. First of all, what was the biggest obstacle you had to overcome then to put that technology into the market? And then secondly, was there ever, when you were developing that, and again, I don't think this can be overstated how important that has been to this business, was there ever an aha moment where you said, the conditions are right, but this thing exists in the market, or I have this idea, and now I believe I can do this?
Well, the philosophy that I've always had from day one of starting the company was, the customer asks you a question, can you do this? The answer is always yes. And you hang up the phone, you scratch your head, you say, okay, let's make it work. This technology basically was an offshoot of what we were previously doing, which basically started, believe it or not, with working with Henry and Renee back in the day when we were supporting Renee to bring PanAmSat up and get, writing letters back and forth and sending them over to Henry to push them through and get PanAmSat accepted in the industry and up against Intelsat. But
actual letters on paper, eh?
Yep. So I mean, there's a lot of history there. But what happened was in 1986, in April of 1986, I got a call from Caspar Weinberger, the Secretary of Defense under Reagan at the time. And that's because we used to travel with Reagan around the world for various summits that he was having. And it was back during the time when there was only a few of us that had the ability to run around the world with both C and KU band transportable antennas. And after a while of successful services and providing not only services for state and the Secret Service, Weinberger came and said, can you have a meeting at the Pentagon? We have a specific application that we need to talk to you about. And again, I said, yes, I'll be there. And they indicated that they wanted to do something from a aircraft carrier at sea. And just as during the first Persian Gulf crisis. So I went there and I called a friend of mine out in California who was making television stabilized antennas, RJ Matthews from CTEL at the time, who used to be at ComSat. And we went in, we presented what we had, my licensing for the KU band services. And we walked out of the Pentagon, we shook hands and said, I think we can do this. Pentagon basically gave us a green light to move forward, and we walked through the gauntlet, of all their questions. And lo and behold, in September of '86, we delivered the first KU band stabilized antenna and put it on the USS Iwo Jima and went sailing over to the Persian Gulf with that thing. The unique thing about it was that we used Intelsat, and actually I think it was ComSat still involved there, but they had to take a KU band spot beam, and they had to follow us from Norfolk, Virginia, all the way across into the Gulf on 338.5 inclined orbit satellite.
Right.
And it was successful. The only problem that we ever had that really was like, oh boy, we got problems here. I got a call, after that was done from the general counsel of Inmarsat, basically giving me a cease and desist notice verbally. And I was kind of in awe, like, really? So I can't use a fixed satellite service out on the ocean, but Mr. Inmarsat can use a standard A flyaway antenna and put it on the ground somewhere.
Right.
So
that was the challenge.
His stuff.
Yeah, that's a great story, and it's interesting. You're probably the only guy who was ever trailed by a KU beam across the ocean. But a wonderful story. Thanks for that, Richard. For you, and I know you've been paying close attention to this, but your innovation is a factory in a box that turns into solar panels for Mana Electric, which uses something called C2 resource utilization technologies to produce, a functional solar panel using only locally available sources. Now that's obviously different than what Richard Hatzel developed for our industry, but for you, what do you envision as the biggest contribution this will make, and what has been your biggest obstacle to development and adoption?
Yeah, well, thank you very much, and first of all, very interesting to hear the other speakers. So maybe to start off, I'll just tell briefly how we started with the idea of Mana, and the whole concept starts from the legacy of the space industry, because ever since we landed on the moon, so to say, people have been thinking, okay, how do we settle the moon and how do we live on the moon? And based on all that literature that was developed over the time, which I was reading 10, 12 years ago, nothing actually came out of that, so to say. Also because the technology wasn't ready and nothing was ready. But the biggest constraint that everyone was running into to set up real colonies on the moon or Mars in the end comes down to power. And that's really what we is the culmination of Mana. Is we're focused on producing power sources using what is available locally in terms of the resources. And our long-term vision is to do this on the moon using the lunar regolith, and we're making good steps in that way. But I think what really enabled it is not even necessarily so much technology, but more an innovative business model. Because really what we decided to do, because there's a lot of people out there who have tried to do ISRU in space, and we've all heard about the planetary resources and deep space industries, but what we did from the start was very much focus on terrestrial applications first, and then apply the technology here on Earth, make a business model here on Earth, and then transfer that eventually, hopefully, to be able to produce solar panels on the moon. Right. So yeah, as you said, it's about in situ resource utilization, and I think the big enabler was the business model, but of course it's also building on the legacy of technology development. And for sure, the business model that we have and the technologies that we've developed would not be feasible 20 years ago, because we've developed at such an exponential rate. So I think that really plays into it. But you do see that there's interesting areas where you can now, even though the idea has been there already for 50, 60, maybe even longer years, we are now at the point where we've been able to combine everything and right time, right place, so to say, to make our business model happen.
Yeah, that convergence of technologies and needs and sort of human endeavor as well. I have to ask you, first of all, did I pronounce your first and last names correctly?
It's Joost van Oorschot, but
so not at all. Okay, my apologies, Joost.
No problem.
You founded your first company at the age of 21, so you've obviously, like Richard, have something in your DNA that makes you do this. It was a company that we read developed music algorithms for analyzing music preferences in groups. Now you're 21 when you did this, but looking at what you have now with Mana, do you see any through lines in terms of your creative abilities? Is there something that connects with what you did with those music algorithms to where you're at now in our industry?
I think potentially, but I think mainly the
Didn't
typical
expect this question, did you?
story.
Yeah.
The typical entrepreneur story is that you got to fail a few times to be successful, and that's reality, right? So I think that's the biggest win that comes out of that. The first company we did quite well in the end, and but it was right around the time that Spotify was picking up, and it was a good time to be doing that, and learned a lot, especially on the business side, but also a lot on the technology side. And for sure, a lot of that plays into what we are doing today. And but in the end, it's a completely different industry. It's music. It's not space. And really, the space side comes just purely from a passion. But I think coming out from outside of the industry, you have a different way of thinking about things, and that applies in our case for two industries. We are both trying to address a market in the space industry, with eventually on the moon trying to produce solar panels and being able to provide power, but also here on Earth, we're addressing a solar panel industry, which or electricity industry, which is quite mature in a sense. The technology is well understood, and we come from such a curveball orientation because we bring something that has been talked about for a long time with ISRU, and all of a sudden we're bringing this to the energy sector here on Earth, and people look at you, it's completely different. And that's both a blessing and a curse. A blessing in the sense that they love to talk to you because you have something different. A curse because it also takes a while for them to wrap their head around the fact that how will this work in the reality. Right,
but as we were saying earlier, you dropped in behind the wall, coming from outside the industry. You've got this screwball idea, but you're connecting dots that have never been connected before, and that seems to be the essence of creativity, at least according to Steve Jobs, who used to say creativity is just connecting dots. So it sounds like you're marching along that path, and so we'll come back to you later on that. But thank you and congratulations. Kate, you wrote the business plan for what many say is the greatest non-technology innovation, bundling an antenna with connectivity service paid for as a monthly fee. What problem were you trying to solve, and how's it going so far?
Thanks, Lou. So we are trying to solve for land mobility, mobile connectivity. So when there are a lot of global coverage gaps, Richard solved for maritime land mobility, maritime mobile communication before, and we were able to leverage his expertise in order to offer a bundled service with our land mobile flat panel steerable antenna. So our antenna is uniquely capable of serving a broad array of land mobility platforms, which to date have not had such a wide adoption of SATCOM. So what we needed to do was make it easy for our customers to buy satellite and buy our antenna as well. So these customers weren't used to buying SATCOM at all. SATCOM, as many of you know, can be really challenging to purchase, especially if you're new to the industry. And new to needing that kind of communication. The markets had been working around their lack of communication as well, and so they didn't necessarily realize they had a problem. So we really needed to lower the barriers to entry. So what we did by bundling our service with our antenna was lower the cost and complexity of adoption. So the plans, it went well, but the plans have evolved as we've been listening to our customers. Since we launched the service, and now we're serving both new and traditional satellite markets. But one thing we've seen is that this demand for mobile connectivity, specifically in land mobility, just keeps growing and growing, especially with the first responder communities. So what you're seeing now is, especially with all of the crazy wildfires in the Western US and Australia specifically, you see a lot of communications gaps, and more of these firefighters are relying on communications in order to fight the fire safely and effectively. And so our services have evolved to serve those communities. So the Kalo service we announced has evolved into Kymeta Connect, which offers a more robust footprint. It offers hybrid satellite and cellular connectivity for a truly uninterrupted communications experience.
Right, that's a big deal.
And we've also added other value-added services. So as we've evolved our antenna technology, we've evolved the services along with it.
Yeah, so you're really moving very quickly along the innovation path with regard to introducing your services. But the problem you were trying to solve was for people who didn't know how to buy satellite, who weren't exposed to, our rather complex industry, you were going to make it easier for them to buy a service, not the satellite service necessarily, correct? Was that
correct? So
yeah.
what we were able to do was bundle our antenna and service, as well as kind of the warranty, everything that the customer needed to be taken care of. We bundled it all together in one monthly fee, so that it was consumable in a way the customer understood, right? Everybody understands their cell phone bill. And we wanted it to be as easy to pay for satellite as it is to pay for your cell phone bill.
Yeah, one-stop shopping.
Exactly.
Right, stop and shop. I have to ask you though, you started at Kymeta, I believe, as an intern, right? Correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, well, I was going to say you have an MBA from the University of Washington. I mean, you didn't just come in from the ice cream stand or lemonade stand on the street. But let me ask you a question. What gave you the insight and the confidence to write that Kalo business plan? Could you have done that as an intern, or is that something that you evolved your confidence for?
It kind of both, right? So one of the great things about working for a startup very early in your career is the opportunity to just kind of jump in and learn from experts like Richard. I know this community is familiar with Bill Marks, who's a team member at Kymeta as well. And I was fortunate enough, I think, in part to be at the right place at the right time and just dig myself into the issues and try to find ways to solve the customer problems. And so, we were noticing that it was, this kind of having a lack of an easy path to satellite services with our antenna was a barrier for selling. And so, with Bill Marks and Richard, we worked with Intelsat to develop the initial service,
right? Which
is then expanded into a global footprint from there.
Right, and it's a big deal. Do you think there's a second act for you?
Always. No, right now I hope.
That's what we like to hear. Yeah.
No, right now I've been able to grow my career at Kymeta, and it's been a phenomenal journey.
Yeah.
I'm working on some of our strategic corporate initiatives as well as for the product management team now. And it's been, as long as I continue to have interesting problems to dig into, this is a great place to be. We've got really exciting technology. We've got customers who are really excited as well to use the technology. And we have a really exciting innovation path going forward, both with the antenna itself as well as with our services.
Yeah, and what's ahead for us in the industry and you is just something that's remarkable. Henry, I'm sure you'll agree with me on that last statement. I mean, Henry, you're the godfather here. You've seen the scope of everything, right, since the founding. Just sort of as a macro view, when you think about what you just heard in the last 30 minutes or so, how do you take that in? Because you have cut a path through so much of this to allow so much of this to transpire. What do you think now when you hear about what Yost and Kate and of course Richard is still doing? What's your take on it?
Well, I'm just delighted that the battles in the past to make room for innovation and to give entrepreneurs the opportunity to jump in with both feet and fulfill their dreams and their business plans and the like. Like I said, it's everything we did over the past few decades to make this industry receptive to innovators and entrepreneurs, and yes, even some crazy people, has paid off, and I think will continue to pay off.
Yeah. But let me ask you this. Because you're obviously still in the game, you obviously, work a lot with Dan. I'm sure you guys talk a lot. And what are some of the barriers to entry in our markets still that particularly frustrate you as a legal counsel that you think will have a negative effect on the future of this booming industry if we don't do something about them? Is there anything?
Yeah, there were probably a few, but to me, the biggest one has been the breakdown in coordination on spectrum use between the FCC and the private sector and the federal government. We have clients who are in the earth sensing business, and it is impossible when you're using the same spectrum or even adjacent spectrum, and even when your spectrum is primarily designated for commercial use, to coordinate that use with the federal agencies has been very, very difficult. It slows down entry, and some of the agencies will try to put conditions on that make it impossible to have a commercial service. And, I've got to put the blame on the spectrum managers of the federal government, NTIA. They seem not to have the ability to make the other federal agencies coordinate and play nicely.
Yeah, it is, and we're going to actually talk about this more in our series on public-private partnerships, which I've invited you to participate in, and I hope you can do that for us a little bit later this season. Is there anything you can do about that? Because it seems almost like it may be endemic to the political side of the industry, which should be an enabler, but isn't always.
Right. Well, there's no easy solution, but I think a little leadership from the executive branch from the White House would be well in order.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to stay with me for a second here because I'm going to go into a remark that one of our other fellow Hall of Famers made in a video interview that he did with Sspi. Journalist Peter DeSelding, who was inducted this year, predicted that a shakeout is ahead for startups. So Joost, don't worry about this, but he said it is vital to our future to make sure that new companies with real businesses continue to get funding. How would you respond to that? Real businesses. Are there unreal businesses in the industry now?
Are you asking me? Sorry.
Well, I'm going to start with Henry, and then I'm going to come back to you, Joost, and then go to Richard.
I think right now, and again with the Leo constellations, people are getting funded. I mean, you had a OneWeb bankruptcy, but they came out of bankruptcy with new vital funding. You've got Elon Musk, you have Jeff Bezos, who probably funds it out of his pocket. I think there is funding and a future for companies with the real business plan and with a real sense of how to provide a service. I think the industry is very healthy and open, and money is flowing in.
Yeah. Joost, over to you. I mean, when you hear, the premier journalist in our industry who doesn't hold back on anything, say something like that, how do you respond to that?
I think, to be honest, they're right to an extent. It's like the .com bubble in a way that the easy business models that have already to an extent been proven out, it's like the low-hanging fruit that everyone's like, oh, I'll just build another rocket, right? And I think there we can all agree that I think right now there's 200 rocket companies or something in the world, all trying to do small launchers. And realistically speaking, not many of them are making it in the end, and many of them who are going to make it probably already have made it, so to say. Now I might be completely wrong, but I think it really depends on what side of the space market you're looking at, and I think what you also see is that on the small sat or CubeSat side, if you don't have a differentiating product, it's not really attractive. Yeah, you can throw a lot of money at it and maybe you'll make it, but especially in a capital heavy industry like the space sector, differentiating yourself can be better, in my opinion, and that's where we are not really concerned, because we are quite differentiated from what everyone else does. So I think it's just what you look at, and the beauty of the space sector is that it's now growing to the point where you actually have to separate the space sector into, you know, the telecoms, the launcher, which already was happening before, but more and more you really have to separate it in its completely own sectors. The same as the internet sector, it's no longer, you don't call it the internet sector, you call it social media or marketplaces, and it's the same in the space sector. And I think then when you look at the space resources sector, where we're one of the bigger players, and we're doing very well, let's say.
Yeah, and as Henry said, being able to provide a service to meet a market need and having a unique selling proposition against it, that's just the law of business, right?
Yeah,
so that'll
yeah,
always
definitely
apply.
No, 100%. And the more players that are doing something that's similar to you, the more you have to focus on your service, let's say. If you're the only player out there, if you're the only launch provider, like was for a long time the case, especially here in Europe where I'm located, you know, you don't have to, you know, you have the monopoly, so you don't care so much about your service that you're providing. But now with the players that are out there on the launch market, service is becoming more and more important, and you're seeing that many of the launch companies that are successful, they are not even the cheapest, which everyone was saying, oh, the cheapest is where it'll go, but they just provide a really good service, from integration to payload handling to just the ease of the systems.
Yeah, exactly. But to your point, we don't need 7-Eleven to create a launch company. We've got enough of them, right? Even if they give out free sodas. Richard, just to sort of stay on this topic, I quoted Peter, and you know, in March, Armand Musi wrote an interesting piece in Space News. He was talking about satellite bankruptcies in 2000 versus, because you remember those, versus the ones that we had in 2020. And he said the 2020 cycle, though, was different because it was primarily driven by new satellite technologies, rendering old satellite technologies obsolete, which is really a side effect of the industry's increasing ability to harness innovation. Generally, would you agree with that? And if so, what does the future look like with regard to the inevitable shakeout that we'll probably see within the next 5 years?
I agree somewhat with it. I don't see the fixed satellite services basically disappearing, but I do see the LEO and MEO satellite constellations coming into play and augmenting the fixed satellite service industry. You know, people like Chimera and other flat panel electronic steered antennas companies are going to constantly be looking at the ability to communicate both with the fixed satellite services and the non-geo satellites. Strictly because in the mobility sector, where a lot of the new innovation is being focused on these days, not only in the maritime or the land-based vehicles. I mean, everybody's looking for trains and buses and trucks, and you know, the military is really going gangbusters for this because now they have the ability to put satellite communications products on their mobility vehicles that don't increase or cause a new radar signature. There are people watching them do not know that they just added a new communication device. So people that are in the innovation arena will constantly seek ways to improve the deliverables that customers want. And as far as I'm concerned, geo satellites are good, plus or minus 60, 65 degrees. But if you're in a land-based mobility or even a maritime mobility or aero, you need to reach out beyond that 65-degree cutoff. And that's where these LEOs are going to enable areas that previously could only be done with maybe some Molina orbits or something like that, or a store and forward, spacecraft. So I look forward, to seeing more innovation, come forward. I think the financial industry is going to continue to fund innovation in this regard. And for, companies like Kymeta, we are already in that business, whereas, hey, we're operating on GEO, but the antenna is already, enabled to work with LEO. And we're doing it today. We have customers that are running LEO, on our antennas very successfully.
Yeah.
So, I'm constantly, striving forward to say, what's the next step? What's the next innovation that is going to, be placed in front of us to say, can you use this, and will enhance where we've been, moving as an industry?
Yeah. For me, LEOs have so much potential. I love the idea that we have ubiquitous broadband connectivity so that we can create new economies in places that may have been flattened by the old economy, right? Rural places, or a restoration of place and economy. I think that's one of the most exciting things that I think about. Just quickly, Richard and Henry, when you guys look at the LEO sector, then I'm going to let Kate finish things for us with a question. But when you guys look at LEO, is there one thing that you say, this is over the next 5 years, the 10 years, LEO is going to transform the world this way? And try to be brief if you can, guys.
Yeah, I think LEO is going to transform the world, just like GEOs did years ago. I think it's going to give the terrestrial broadband service a real run for its money, and it's going to give people connectivity who never had it before.
Correct.
Yeah. Richard, you generally agree with that?
100%.
Yeah.
I look at the LEOs constellations, especially the KA LEO constellations coming forward, that it will allow the design of antenna systems to become smaller and smaller, because we know that the connected car industry is coming, and it's going to be coming hard and fast, but it's got to be small. The antennas have to be small to not take up too much real estate in the roofs of the vehicles.
Right.
But everybody wants some type of connection. And that LEO constellation is going to accomplish it.
Yeah, very good. Thanks for that, guys. Kate, last word to you. Among the welcome guests of our disruptors that got in over the gates were women. More women have entered our industry since 2009 than at any time. Sspi has honored more women than any other organization at any time, and we've seen the impact. Now, I think there's a correlation between the success of the industry and the fact that more women are in it, but that's easy for me to say. As you observe this phenomenon for us, do you think that leadership will have to change? Will styles of leadership change? Will there be a different type of innovation introduced? What type of dynamics do you think women will bring now to the industry, now that they're full partners?
I think that's a really good question. Thanks, Lou. I think that as we've seen across other industries, as you increase diversity at overall, whether it's women, whether it's people of color, ideally a combination thereof, you see new ideas, and there's kind of the opportunity for them to get listened to, right? So I think that leadership styles will evolve over time, not necessarily just because of women, but because of just younger people in the force, and that in the workforce, and kind of just everything changes, right? And so I've noticed a change over my course in the satellite industry since 2013. Just having more women visible has been really inspirational to me, and but I don't know if consciously it's changed how I work or what I'm working on. So I think that as you have more diverse voices, women included, you'll get the diversity of ideas, the diversity of leadership styles that lead to innovation.
Yeah, just quickly, Kay, what's the one change you've seen since 2013? What's been the most significant thing you've observed or felt?
You know, I just think I'm not the only woman in meetings most of the time anymore, which just leads to some comfort. But otherwise, you know, it's hard to identify one specific item. It's been an evolution.
Yeah, exactly.
But a welcome one.
Well, you bring more innovators in, right?
Exactly.
That's always a good thing, and certainly for an industry like ours. That's all the time we have. But gentlemen and lady, thank you so much for kicking us off today. This has been for me a terrific panel, and I've always wanted to speak with you. So now I've got the chance. But thank you again for doing this for us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All. Thank you.
Well, now what we're going to do is to speak with one Hall of Famer and one of our 20 under 35 cohort about leadership in particular. And we call this segment Leading Questions. So I'm going to take you there now, and thank you for being with us today.
Obviously, to lead, people need to follow you. Power is elusive. It doesn't really, it doesn't translate to the long term. So people wanting to follow you is really critical. I think you have to learn very early how it is that you inspire people to want to do something hard, make them understand. I'd say communication is a really critical skill people should be very, very good at, both oral and written, but the ability to convey an idea and have people understand it and want to get behind it is an important thing. Being tall and having a deep voice helps too, I've found. So I'll take that.
In aerospace, maybe a little bit more than other industries, we thrive on experience and education. Those types of things pull a lot of weight just because we thrive on things like heritage and legacy and past lessons learned. Some of that background I know just takes time to accumulate, and I'm well on my way with getting those experiences under my belt. But it can be really intimidating as a young person, and especially a young person in a leadership a leadership position when you don't necessarily have those credentials to lean on. I've been able to learn even in those scenarios that the position can be daunting, but there's also a really unique and maybe ample opportunity to ask the dumb questions. And that has given me, I think, a lot of the success that I've had to date. Fostering that type of environment where curiosity is encouraged allows for a more collaborative teamwork type backbone. And in that environment, people truly get to understand the problem and not just the technical experts in the room. And then when the entire team really understands and can wrap their minds around the problem that you're trying to solve, you get more elegant and thoughtful results.
Thanks, Lou. It is one thing to come up with a brilliant innovation and to break into a new market. It's another thing to keep innovating year after year for a half century. In our next panel, we look at how one company has kept the innovation engine turning over in a segment of the business they invented that it went on to become nearly a commodity. That company is Hughes Network Systems. It was founded as Digital Communications Corporation in 1971 by a group of engineers that included Hall of Fame members John Puente and Bert Edelson. They started in the proverbial garage, and within 6 years had 250 employees and more than $10 million in revenue. In 1985, the company invented the Very Small Aperture Satellite Antenna, or VSAT, and after a series of acquisitions was bought by Hughes Aircraft and renamed Hughes Communications. Joining us today from Hughes Network Systems is Hall of Fame member and Executive Vice President and General Manager for North America, Paul Gaske, and two members of our 20 under 35, Principal Engineer Gaurav Bhatia, who was honored in 2019, and Senior Principal Engineer Rohit Seshadri, who was honored in 2011. And serving as Paul's wingman in this discussion of innovation is Adrian Morris, Executive Vice President of Engineering. So, Paul, first question goes to you. Hughes Network Systems has been making technology breakthroughs almost continuously since its founding. What do you think are the key ingredients that go into building an organization that can do this continuous innovation?
Well, I think, Robert, probably the number one thing you have to start with is the obvious ingredient of very bright people. So you try to hire people that you think are intelligent, they have good experience, and they, when you select them, that they seem creative to start with. But then what you do is you put them with your most creative people. So they learn from day one to think for themselves, to come up with ideas, to follow those ideas. And then ultimately, of course, we have to give them the freedom to do that, so that when they have good ideas or they have ideas, we let them carry those out to fruition. And by doing that, generation after generation, you get better and better at the innovation aspect of the design process that we go through.
You said something there about, think for themselves. Of course, you hire bright people and they can capable of doing that, but there's a level of permission involved in that. And how does that get across to, your relatively new hires who are coming on board trying to figure out where they fit in?
Well, I think part of that is in the mentoring process, because I think what you want to do when you assign a project to a young person starting is you want to prescribe the boundaries of what the thing's trying to achieve, but you don't want to give away too many hints of how to do it. That allows them to go figure it out. It allows them to own what they've designed, and the amount of buy-in from that person into carrying the project through to fruition, is tremendously higher than here's 6 ways you should do it exactly like this, step 1, 2, 3, 4. That's not as fulfilling to people generally. So they'll own their creative effort. And I think when they've been treated that way, the next generation of people that come in under them will also be treated that way. So it's an important thing that started really in our founding, some of our people like Gene Gabbard, Pradman Call, people like that, that's how they operated. They basically said, hey, here's a problem. Here's some stuff you need to know, and come back in a couple of weeks with an answer for me. Right. And so that just built year after year. And that's how you get to that stage.
Pretty demanding. Adrian, you of course have to run this day to day in terms of this never-ending technology innovation. That's a really demanding thing that Paul just outlined. How does it work from your perspective in terms of encouraging this continuous innovation?
Thanks, Robert. So just to follow up on some details from Paul, we recruit from the best schools, and we use Hughes ex-alumni from those schools to do the recruiting. And that's been really successful, where we go back to the places that Paul and others went to school and go back and recruit people from the same place. When we get a new grad into the building, into Hughes, we encourage an immediate immediacy of getting him a technical assignment straight away, within him being here just a couple of weeks. And we follow that up with mentoring and immediate mentoring also. And the mentoring doesn't only cross engineering boundaries, but we give them exposure to business development people, operations people, and engineering people, because we, as Paul stated, we want them to figure out why we're doing something and what's needed to accomplish the particular project. We have a system and service environment at Hughes, so we don't just build equipment, but we actually run services. So it gives the young engineer an opportunity to get customer exposure very early in his career. And a young engineer, we will encourage him to be assigned to multiple projects in his first 5 years, because we want to broaden the experience. So we think that's really important. If he's here for 5 years, he should have not, in most cases, been assigned to 2, 3, even 4 projects as he started. And then we promote strong technical base across all of Hughes. Our business people are often originally from the engineering group or from somebody else's engineering group, but a strong base in technical expertise for our business leaders, our marketing leaders, our operations leaders. So that makes the dialogue much more rich when we're trying to figure out what's the problem we want to solve and why are we trying to solve it.
The sales engineer, the business engineer, they are the foundation of this business. And I always kind of just look at it in awe because it's such an odd combination of skills. And yet when it works, it works. Gaurav, I want to turn to you for a moment. You have been responsible for, and this is why you were honored with our 20 under 35, you've been responsible for a whole series of innovative developments for that next gen Jupiter system, the modems in use in that system. What's the experience as part of the engineering team of creating new technologies and getting them accepted to our product?
Yeah, so like Adrian said, when I came in, I think within the first week, the thing I was tasked to do was build a satellite delay emulator. This was for our Spaceway system. And obviously, I mean, when you come out of college, you're not thinking of how a satellite delay emulator is going to be built, the hardware pieces, the software and everything. So I guess it got the necessary, I think you pick up the necessary skills from there, right? So, and then there's the mentoring and advanced mentoring that Hughes does. So I kind of benefited from doing multiple projects in a short span of time. I started as a board design engineer, so had to do CAD stuff, go to factory development and everything. Then I worked on the Jupiter gateway design. So that was the first generation of our gateway, and the goal was to reduce the size of it by an order of 2 of magnitude. So it brought up pretty interesting challenges for not just the server platforms, the virtualization techniques that had just started coming, the synchronization of timing across these multiple gateways and everything. So I think I was lucky, and frankly, I'm not unique at Hughes. Like Hughes has a engineering organization where you are actually promoted to move across different teams and get new experiences, especially early on. So I think 4 years down the line, I finally moved into the satellite modems development. And when I reached there, basically, we were at that point, I think, doing OQPSK, and demands from customers had started to come in for linear 2, 8, 16 APSK. Our advanced development group had created SCMA, the scrambled code multiple access. So I think there were a lot of opportunities because of either the customer needs or customer feedback, whether it be external customers or our own internal operations organizations, the contribution from our R&D group, and just internally our team, because we were closest to our own project, and we constantly keep up with the research material that's out there from either the industry or academia. So it kind of gives us a good feeling to a good idea as to where we can innovate and where it's more, I guess, productive to put our time right now. And we get the blessing from our engineering management who are kind enough to actually allow us to pursue these different innovations across the same product line or new product lines. So I guess it's a very rewarding experience, and it's still continuing to date.
It's funny what you describe, what sounds like a very small organization, right? The intimacy of being able to work together as a team to get access to senior management when you need it and so forth. And yet, of course, Hughes is not a very small organization. How does that work?
So I guess the open door policy is definitely there. So not just within my team, like I'm part of the advanced modem design, the signal processing group, but anytime we have to bounce ideas of our R&D group, we just stop by their offices to, just have a chat, and they're kind enough to give their time to us on that. But also across like the hardware, software, firmware verticals and the RF team, because you work on so many different projects early on, you get to know so many people. And so now you're on a personal bond basis with them. So hallway conversations or even just, chats talking about our own products. It has allowed me and a lot of my teammates also to kind of have that, I guess, extra oomph needed to create that differentiation in our product line. And everybody, like Adrian said, has a very deep technical expertise generally in their field of work. So that helps, that we are not just floundering, but we are actually trying to, contribute to our overall engineering design goals. So,
well, I'm sure your boss is glad to hear that you're not just floundering. Rohit, I recall back to 2011 meeting you, presenting you with an award back then, and you had not been working for Hughes for a very long time at that point, but you were already representing the company to a very high-level standards organization, the DVB Return Communication Systems, RCS group in Europe, and you'd come up with a solution, and with the company's support, you presented it as, to become part of the RCS standard. Again, it was remarkable, or at least seemed remarkable to the people who selected you. What was the problem you were trying to solve, and why was an open standard the right way to go with that, particularly in an industry which is not known for its love of open standards?
Right. So so I'd joined Hughes around that time, just out of graduate school. And if I recall, the problem that we were trying to address back then relates to terminals with low-cost power amplifiers. So generally speaking, these devices, especially if you drive them hard, tend to be nonlinear and cause a distortion in your signal, which introduces some problems in our link reliability. So what our group was looking at was to design transmission technologies that are inherently sort of resilient to these impairments. And by some coincidence, it turned out that the technical module of the standards committee was also looking at solutions for the same problem. So after having worked on the problem internally, our leadership team felt that, maybe it's a good idea. The solution, what we have is good enough to take to the standards body. And that's how we took it. And that's the process, that's the story, I guess, behind that development. But coming into Hughes, I was very much aware that, our engineering team has a very proud tradition of making very substantial contributions to standards body. So I was very much aware of that. So I was very excited, and I very much relished the opportunity of carrying the torch, if you will, of making meaningful contributions myself. And of course, I think it wasn't really one person. It wasn't really just me, actually. A lot of it built on the expertise in my group and in engineering. So it was really a team effort. I was the only one under 35 at that time, so I just ended up getting the award. So yeah.
That's wonderful. Yes, you drew the short straw because of your age, eh?
Yes, pretty much.
Interesting. Coming back to Paul and Adrian, and this is a big general question, but where do innovations start at the company? I mean, Gaurav talked about customers, which of course is always a good place to get ideas, but what is the path that they have to go through to get accepted as a product or a service and actually be introduced? And I don't know which of you would like to address that.
Well, maybe I'll just say a couple words on that. I think first off, the culture is such that the path isn't very long. You can, as you heard the open door policy, you literally walk into your boss's office or somebody else or somebody in the business group. Say you're in engineering, you walk into the business heads and you say, hey, I've got an idea. I think we can do X, Y, and Z. And they hear you out and say, hey, that's not a bad idea. Let's see if we can get a project going. Or, that sounds really good. We have something else going on. Let's plug it into that. And so we're always looking to try to do something better. So, any idea that sounds like, hey, that's better than what we're doing, or that's something new that'll make us better. I mean, it's easy to grab those ideas and move forward. So generally starting those kind of ideas is, just naturally arises in the organization. But there've been a couple of really, important examples where somebody had an idea that nobody had been working on at all. And in their own spare time, they were working on it, and they came in and gave a quick presentation on what they were doing, and people realized, hey, that is really a cool idea. Let's do something with that. And they immediately funded it and moved on. So it's really spontaneous. You can't have a meeting and say for the next hour, we're going to invent something cool. That's not how you innovate, right? And so you just leave it to all of your people to come up with their ideas, and you support them when they do have them.
Right, but and Adrian, just before we turn to you, but let me just push back on that a little bit, because you can't fund everything, and there has to be some kind of sets of bars that an idea needs to pass before you're going to put the company's resources into bringing it to market and hoping to sell it, or hoping to have it be an augmentation of an existing product that's going to be compelling. So what's that analysis like?
Well, I think, certainly there are the cases where you look at something and say it might be a good idea, and you spend a little bit more time studying whether it will be a good idea. And even the person that proposes it frequently comes back and says, well, I kind of missed, I didn't know you could do this and this in a different way, and so you'll tune the idea. Not many things are, if you will, dismissed out of hand, but at the same time, you will do some initial analysis. You don't just do everything that anybody suggests. I don't want to lead you to believe that. But generally, people have a thought of, hey, this is important and this is why it's important. That's why I want to suggest it. So you take it, you take it as far as you can, and if it's good, it continues.
I just want to make sure you said that, so your employees didn't all come up to you and say, well, listen, I got this great idea for a used car, sales technique. Adrian, how about from your point of view?
So we inside the engineering group, we have a group of people called advanced development. And one of their jobs is to figure out what's the theoretical limits of networks and systems. And so mathematics and pure communication theory is a big deal for us, and very important because it sets one boundary. And then on the other hand, in our business and operations area, those folks have a great handle on what's practical, be it from a cost standpoint, in terms of what will the customer view the product at. So we've constantly matched those two bookends, if you will, together to try and come up with the right answer as to what Paul was talking about. But we do indeed do a lot of proof of concepts before we embark on a full product development.
Gaurav said something interesting in his reply about getting, of course, the great ideas coming from your customers. They tell you that they need something, they want something they're interested in. And indeed, it's very fertile ground. It can also, at least according to the Harvard professor Clayton Christensen, who's no longer with us, in his book Innovator's Dilemma, it's also potentially a trap, because you can innovate for your customers based on what they already know, and then you risk missing the idea that might be something your customers are not yet buying, but some other group of customers might buy, and eventually your existing customers will. So I'm curious, when you're balancing that innovation process, what do you do to try to find the crazy ideas, or the ideas that appeal and that are selling to a market you're not currently selling to? So Gaurav, since it was your idea, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, so like I said, we as a customer and feedback or any customer requests, unique use cases, they're definitely something that drive requirements or innovation on our end. But and then the advanced development group here is another portion of it. But a lot of it also comes from when we have just our design cycles, like we did the first Jupyter generation, then the second, and now we are at the third one. So these are generally very fertile times when you can throw in a lot of bigger ideas, and generally management will approve them because they give bigger quanta of jump in throughput, better latency, higher reliability, those typical internet service metrics that we quantify the service with. And when the new team members come, like a lot of my time has been spent over the last few years mentoring and working closely with the new members of my team. And basically we just think, okay, looking at these research papers, what's the latest cool thing that's going on? And internally, we just say, okay, 10% of our time or something we're gonna spend on, or just as a weekend reading or evening reading, we're gonna spend on looking at this. And then we have internal presentations. Now, it's like any other kind of research, right? 1 out of 10 will really stick, but it gives enough opportunity for us to be abreast of the research going on out there. because the schedules don't change. They will be tight because we want to be quick to market also. But this gives us a good opportunity to, I guess, create a bank of ideas for the next phase of whenever the product delivery is. So we typically, like Adrian said, if it's really good and we see immediate gains, or it's something that has a slightly longer gestational period, then we go into demo mode, and it might run for a few weeks, few months, whatever, and then everybody says upward, downward, and that's how finally it reaches, I guess, fruition as a product, or maybe next time, kind of thing. So I guess that's pretty much the gist of it from my end, at least.
That's very interesting. I mean, does the Jupyter system fit that model? I remember when I first, you first made the announcement, which goes back quite a ways now, and I looked at it and I was thinking about it, and I thought, wow, these folks have the courage to do something that actually Christensen said you have to do, which is to be willing to some extent to cannibalize what you've got to get to the next thing, because you could presumably have gone on selling VSAT systems forever, but this is an order, I'm not a mathematician, it's an order of magnitude above a VSAT system. So, I mean, Adrian, Paul, was this that kind of thing, or am I just misreading the tea leaves?
Well, so in addition to what Gaurav just said, by definition, we've got to be looking 5-10 years out in our decisions, and the customer is one really valuable input that we need to look at. But for example, 5G is coming on the horizon now. We've got to think through where that's going to be in the next 5 years in terms of what decisions we would make. We see a lot of what we call NGSO satellites, low orbiting satellites. We see that as a change that GEOs and non-NGSO satellites will see networks that are more hybrid by nature, because of that combination. So that's just 2 examples. And the third one, it's really important to us to hire new grads, because we get a bunch of new ideas and a new set of thinking from those folks every time a new set come in. And we've got to be open to different ways of looking at the future.
Yeah, I think, Robert, I'd add to that too, that when you think about activities that are just sort of evolutionary, you're improving a product, you have some good ideas, you make it a little bit better here, a little bit better there. And over time, the product as a whole moves forward and is better through innovation. That's the one path. But the path of sort of, if you will, revolutionary or major change, for instance, the Jupyter going to the high throughput satellites, for us, that was built out of an effort Adrian's team was involved in, which was building what was called the Spaceway satellite and satellite systems. And that was the first real, if you will, spot beam form systems with beam hopping and routers on a satellite. And it pushed all kinds of technologies. And as a spin out of that, when we said, hey, we need a lot more capacity for our customers, Adrian's team went and looked at it and went in a fixed spot beam approach with the Jupyter 1 and then Jupyter 2 and so on, because that could be realized in a short amount of time with a lot less R&D dollars. But it was very innovative and changed significantly what we could do for our customers. And so you're driving there where you've thought about it inside. No customer came and said, hey, why don't you give me some spot beam service, right? You have to be on your toes to come up with where the opportunities are.
Right. Rohit, this question is sparked by the fact that the last time I saw you was a decade ago when I presented you with one of our awards. It's characteristic of Hughes, in my experience of the company, that once people join the company, they tend to stay sometimes for decades. And that's, interestingly enough, not an idea we normally associate with a high rate of innovation. But in thinking about it, is that really kind of one of the company's secret sauces?
I would have to say yes, because I think innovation has to be built on a solid foundation, because you can't build something on a weak foundation, I think, on nothing. So I think, as Mr. Morris said, we have a group that my group does communication theory. There are other groups that have specialize in other aspects. So there is a lot of sort of a very rich and a varied knowledge base. So I think so. It's sort of a rich environment for a new person to come in and to have this already laid out, and so to build on top of that. So I think this breadth of experience, the knowledge, different subject, different areas, really helps. So I think that it's a key, I would imagine, to why we've been so successful in pushing the envelope. Yes.
Well, when you got the best playground with the best toys, why would you ever want to leave? I want to take a moment now just to thank Paul Gasky, Adrian Morris, Gaurav Bhatia, and Rohit Sadri for taking us inside this remarkable innovation engine that is Hughes Network Systems. And as we get ready for our next discussion of leadership, then we're going to take a moment to hear from our on-demand interviews with members of the Hall of Fame and 20 under 35, other than the luminaries we've just been speaking with. Here it comes.
You have to get people to buy in to some level, and you have to recognize that buy-in really will probably only happen with some small wins. People will be skeptical at the beginning, and you have to put some small wins out there for them to be able to see, and you will probably have to point out to them, sometimes it will be so small that they may not, recognize them as wins at the time, right? But what I have seen is that when people start recognizing the wins and the potential and how doing things in a particular way and how the change is helping them, that's really where I think that really then change becomes permanent. Because if people don't buy into it, it's like like you've just did a rubber band and they'll spring back to the original shape, right after that initial momentum goes, and you really haven't changed the trajectory at all. It's very, very important it may take a little bit more time, but you'll have a permanent change if you kind of make sure everybody's going towards you.
And I remember being in one of my mentors' office over the course of a mentoring session, and something he said really struck a nerve with me. And he said, I'm always puzzled by how people come to my office and say, I want to be person X, or I want to have the role of person Y. And the reality of the matter is that 15, 20 years from now, the job you're going to have doesn't even exist yet. So the best thing you can do for your career is do your current job better than anyone else has ever done. And that really resonated with me and something I really took to heart.
Well, thanks to both of those folks for sharing their views with us. I'm now pleased to introduce SSPI's Membership Director, Tamara Bond-Williams, to moderate our third and final panel. In some ways, the one that's the most fun because we get to ask so many questions of so many smart people, the Leadership Jam. Tamara.
Thank you, Robert. And everybody, welcome to the Leadership Jam. If you were here for the last Leadership in Turbulent Times, you'll remember that for this segment, Hall of Famers meet and ask questions of 20 under 35 program honorees and vice versa. My job is to get that going and to step back. We're going to spread this around a little bit. Last time we were in pairs. This time we're going to give different groups, different people opportunities to ask other different people questions. I'm hoping that when we do this, that the format gives us all the idea that this is an open conversation. So please feel free to make comments where it makes sense. And so with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists, beginning with our 20 under 35 participants, who are all from the 2020 cohort of honorees. I'll introduce Bethany Downer, ESA Hubble Space Telescope Chief Communications Officer. And that's actually a promotion since she won her honor. So congratulations, Bethany. In that capacity, Bethany oversees content for esahubble.org and outreach and communications for the Hubble Space Telescope for the European Space Agency. Bethany is also Director of Communications for Star Harbor Space Academy, where the motto is, solving for space, solves for Earth. Well said. Julia Federico is co-founder of Sspi, which is Space Products and Innovation, a German-based startup that enables satellites to be built like Legos through a universal plug-and-play adapter. Dr. Jeffrey Stewart, Mission Design and Navigation Technologist at Jet Propulsion Laboratory. In this capacity, he serves as lead for NASA's heliophysics smallsat formation mission, Sunrise, to form a space-based radio interferometer in geospace. And Professor Terry Hart, he's currently a professor at Lehigh University. He was previously the president of Loral Skynet, as well as being a former astronaut who flew as mission specialist on the Space Shuttle Challenger's 5th mission. And finally, Kathy Leaders, who we just heard from in our leading questions. She is the Associate Administrator for Human Exploration and Operations Mission Directorate for NASA. She is a 2021 inductee to the Space and Satellite Hall of Fame. So we just did this. And Kathy works to integrate commercial launch with human spaceflight, working with such organizations as SpaceX, Boeing, and Northrop Grumman, enabling us to envision as a public enterprise, once again, such amazing projects as the upcoming Artemis project. And so welcome, panelists. I'm going to start with Jeffrey, and I'm going to ask Jeffrey if you would like to ask a question of one of your fellow panelists.
Yeah, absolutely, I would. And sorry for giving you a tongue twister in my intro. Yeah, I guess I'd like to start with a question for Terry Hart. In that you've been a leader in both engineering and in business for information technology and satellites, but you're also unique in that you've also flown an orbital mission for NASA on the space shuttle to go and repair a satellite while it was in orbit. So I guess how did your management experience at Bell and at Telstar assist you in your career as an astronaut? And after you retired from the astronaut corps and returned to Loral Skynet and other places, what did your spaceflight experience bring to those new opportunities as well?
Well, good. Well, thank you, Jeffrey, and thank you for all the good work you folks are doing out there. Really fun to watch. Amazing things you do. Actually, let me turn that question around a little bit. When I was selected by NASA, I was a young engineer at Bell Laboratories doing mechanical and electrical design on electronic power converters mostly. So I had no real management experience, but of course I benefited from the Bell Labs environment at that time, which was actually made up largely of executives who came from Bellcom. And Bellcom was an organization that the government, that NASA took from Bell Labs and moved about 200 people down to Washington during Apollo. So they all did the system engineering and trajectory analysis and so forth for Apollo at that time. So I had the benefit of that as a growing experience, you know, as a young engineer. So I get down to NASA, and of course, you know, NASA always regarded for their high technical prowess, which of course is true. But the single most important capability that I saw in my years there was their ability to train and operate, you know, highly technical teams doing complex and difficult missions, you know, which is really, you know, quite a skill. And I think in a sense that's what NASA does best. And you know, a lot of times the public maybe doesn't appreciate that when they think about the technology and everything, but behind the scenes of the operational, you know, training and techniques, mission control and so forth. You know, so that really showed itself in the public probably best during Apollo 13. Of course, the movie helped emphasize, you know, just how important that was. In fact, you know, our training would often point out that had the team not progressed to that level by Apollo 13, maybe on Apollo 11, they may not have pulled that off. The crew may not have made it back. So teamwork is everything, you know. So yeah, to answer your question more directly, then when I came back, you know, from NASA to Bell Laboratories as director of engineering for the Telstar program, and even more so after the company was bought by Loral, and I was operating, you know, as operations the executive, as president of the division. I try to use those teamwork principles that NASA used both in our operations to support the television networks, which were very demanding, of course, on our satellites. They required very well-produced access to the satellites and so forth. So I was able to bring a lot of those lessons here from NASA and from the Air Force, my experience as well, that environment later. So yeah, I hope that answered your question, but thank you for that.
No, it absolutely did. Thank you.
And Terry, do you want to return the favor?
Yes, I certainly would. Thank you, Tamara. Yeah, I've had one of the wonderful things about teaching is I send students off into the streets. It's almost all my students are doing our aerospace program at Lehigh. And several have gone to JPL, and I get to hear the stories back about all the exciting things they're doing, and often they'll be working multiple missions, and I like to ask Jeffrey for these long duration developments, which could go on for many years, of course, prior to launch and many years after launch. How do you maintain the peakness of your team? We always had a saying at NASA that you have to maintain an even strain, because the training and then coming back from mission is kind of a down spot, and then you get excited building up to another mission. These cycles sometimes are difficult, for people to manage their personal lives through. How do you do that at JPL?
That's a really good question. The two-word answer is patience and forgiveness. There's a slightly longer answer, but I guess first an anecdote exactly along those lines. One of the people who was working on the Pluto missions that eventually turned into New Horizons, he was one time working as a science advisor for a movie in Hollywood, and some of the producers there were cautioning him and saying, just so you know, movies take a long time to put together. It could be a couple of 2 to 5 years before this movie actually comes out. And the science advisor just kind of chuckled and he said, well, it's fine. I've been working on this mission for the past couple of decades. So, I can wait. But to answer your question kind of more directly for my experiences at JPL, you actually kind of mentioned it already. One of the factors that we use is we have several different missions or many missions going on at the same time. And a lot of times we have people work on multiple missions. So, for example, myself, like I'm the MDNav lead on the Sunrise mission, but at the same time, I'm also working on another mission, NEA Scout, which is about to launch when SLS Artemis 1 launches. And I've worked in the intervening time. I worked the New Horizons flyby of Arrokoth, the Kuiper Belt object. So while we've been working on the proposal and early development of Sunrise, I've also been able to work on stuff that's in operations or near to operations. And my experience is not particularly unique at JPL like that because we have a diversity of missions, we get to have a diversity of experience and work with a great diversity of people. I'm maybe using the word diversity too much, but that's that availability there to have different experiences is actually really critical, I think. One, to maintaining our peakness, as you say, keeping us in good shape for when we get to operations on any particular mission. But it is, I will say, like, we also have to have some careful, deliberate planning of these things as well. For example, on Sunrise, we know when we launch, we're going to have a period between when we deliver our hardware and when we're actually in orbit. And that's going to could be up to a year. And so in that time, we're going to have to put in training. We're going to have to document things very well. We're going to have to accommodate this time that is downtime when other people, like when certain people might go to other projects just so they have something to do, but then be able to bring them back in quickly and get them up to speed when we're ready to do our own work for Sunrise. And that's kind of, I think, where the last, my glib little thing of forgiveness comes in. Like, as wonderful as JPL is, as wonderful as NASA is, we are never perfect. In fact, if we were perfect, we wouldn't be pushing the envelope, right? As you say, like, we wouldn't be stressing ourselves if we weren't doing everything that we could. So at the times where we do make a mistake or take a misstep or have a hiccup, treating it as the learning experience it is, rather than as something that has to be avoided at all costs. I think that's one more component that's made us successful. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
I just want to say, Jeff, I'm going to say that you can never use the word diversity too much.
Well, yeah, I don't want to. I'm sure other people will mention the same thing too. I don't want to steal their thunder.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I took notes on this idea of teamwork and maintaining teamwork at peak over long periods of time. It just seems to me that, like you said, diversity of experience and also diversity of who you're working with over time just keeps a degree of energy going. I don't know, that just occurred to me as you were speaking.
Absolutely. Like I say, it's not just the different missions, it's working with the people and hearing their stories. Human beings love to tell stories. JPLers are no different, and it's really fun to listen to the old campfire stories, we call them, from other missions about things that went wrong or things that went right, even though we expected them to go wrong. There's a lot of fun inside JPL stories that we like to tell sometimes.
I love the term campfire stories. You've now given me yet another idea that makes more work for me, but that's okay. Jeff, I think you wanted to say something to Kathy, who just appeared on the screen.
Yes, absolutely. Speaking of long term, I wanted to get your perspective on what you see for human presence on the moon and in Mars over the next 20 years, because we've explored them a lot with robots. We of course had the wonderful Apollo missions that inspired me to go into the space industry. Even though a little bit before my time, but hearing the stories of them really inspired me. So what's your perspective on what the human presence will be on the moon and on Mars in the future, and what will it mean to people back here on Earth as well?
So I appreciated hearing both of you talk about things, because we're trying to go back to the moon, and we're working hard to go back to the moon. We'll probably have a few missteps along the way, but it's very important for us to go back to the moon, to want to stay and conduct a mission on the moon and around the moon for a sustained period of time. We don't want this to be a race, right? This is about going back in a way that we're doing it as a team. And you also brought up this idea of diversity. We want to go back. Before, we went back to show national preeminence, and now we're trying to go back as an international endeavor and show a different face of who is landing on the moon than went before, right? That's why it's very, very important for us from a NASA perspective to talk about this being the first woman and people of color, so that people are seeing themselves with who's going and exploring, and that we're doing it together. It's also very important for us, and even though it may seem kind of crazy, we've all been talking about the importance of doing things that are pushing the envelope for all of us, right? To be able to learn from. Maybe not, but the reason we're doing these things, and the reason we're talking about going there and doing it internationally, and we are doing it internationally, we have a collaboration with our cislunar platform, our gateway system, that's with ESA and JAXA and the Canadians already, along with already having science experiments and already having research. And you talked about the CubeSats already on Artemis 1. We want to do this as an international endeavor, but also commercially. We're trying to allow, for the first time, us not just talking about this being a government endeavor, but also how do we find other ways for people to collaborate and learn and take advantage of the fact that we're doing this and establishing this foothold there. I will tell you, we don't know how to do it all, because I firmly believe that if I already knew how to do everything that I was doing over the next 20 years, I'm failing. I need to be doing things that are so hard that we don't have the answers, because it's through us figuring out the answers that we're pushing the knowledge base of humankind, which is honestly what we're doing. And I love the stories that Terry told, because it's about us pushing that and figuring that out. Then that helps us solve the problems for how do we make sure we can do operational controls for our TV stations? but how do we make sure we're meeting the communication needs? One of my favorite things is one of the big challenges we have is how do we make sure that if we're going to go have people go, and first we're going to learn from us doing it on Mars, and then we are pushing towards going to Mars, because it's even harder. That's like such a crazy problem for us to solve, right? How do you keep people healthy and safe for 3 years versus days or months, right? How do you keep that? And that is such a huge obstacle out there that we've got to go do things way different. And we've got people now that are trying to figure out, how do I make lettuce taste like chocolate? Man, if you can't sell that on Earth, I don't know what you can sell. Because if I have lettuce that can taste like chocolate, sheesh, I got the best product out there ever. But that's the kind of thing you got to do to make people healthy. When you got to go to Mars, is figure out how to grow plants that taste like chocolate. That's a winner for me right there. So, but, you know, it's all these things that are about keeping people healthy and happy in very challenging situations. That, guess what? We deal with that kind of stuff here on Earth all the time. One of my favorite examples was when COVID hit. Last April, our team of doctors were able to put out pointers for how to be able to be healthy and happy in isolation. Because guess what? That's what we've been working on for 50 years. How to keep people healthy and happy in isolation. So that's one of my favorite examples for how does doing these hard things get us ready to then help us solve these problems here on Earth. And those are my lettuce tasting like greens tasting like chocolate is one of my favorites. But these are very, very serious things that also can help us here on Earth.
Yeah, and I really appreciate the point you made, and I think there's so many of these things. I mean, to me, like, of course, COVID was unexpected to everybody, but the lettuce tasting like chocolate sounds like something that'd be wonderful as well. You'd have a healthy dessert for once. But I guess I really appreciate that some of those things are unexpected. I think that is, to come back to diversity briefly, like I think that's one of the wonderful things that when it's done well, that you get those unexpected wonderful things.
Yeah, we had some lettuce that didn't taste that good too. So I didn't talk about those, right? So that tasted even worse than lettuce, but yes. Yeah. But hey, Jeffrey, I got a question for you.
Of course.
So you're a leading mission design and navigation for the Sunrise mission. Mm-hmm. So, which is also used in CubeSats. We talked about that for a unique kind of astronomy. So tell us a little bit more about that mission and the timeline for it. You kind of mentioned it a little bit, but maybe give us a little bit more data.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start by saying I don't science very well. I'm an engineer. So I'm going to channel their thoughts as best I can. But the Sunrise mission is actually I really love it for many different reasons, but I think one of the big ones is that this kind of tagline we made for ourselves of, doing decadal level science for a small budget. We're tackling one of the big outstanding problems of heliophysics, which is whenever there's a coronal mass ejection, the solar flare coming out of the sun, we don't fully understand them, but they're hugely important for space weather. They're like in some sense, the hurricanes of space weather. Right. And if we got hit by one, I'm not sure how many people are familiar with the Carrington Event, but like that was back in the 1800s, late 1800s. And that at the time there was just, telegraph lines and stuff like that. And when that event occurred and it hit Earth, there were just sparks flying out of these things. Like a story I heard is like 2 operators unplugged the batteries from their telegraphs and could still talk to each other for hours because there was just so much energy flowing. If that same event hit us now, it would be, like the equivalent of the damage of the COVID pandemic done in a few hours. It would knock things out for months on end, it would be a disaster. So we need to understand these. They're critically important to understand. But one of the key pieces we're missing from them is whenever one of these bursts occurs, there's also a big radio burst that comes as well, like this big signal in the radio frequency. We don't really know where they come from related to the CME. We don't really know how it's connected. We don't understand the physical mechanism that causes this. But if we can understand that physical mechanism, that's another key to the puzzle or puzzle piece that can help us to put together that space weather understanding a whole lot better. And so what Sunrise is doing is, the 6 spacecraft are forming this radio interferometer in space to be able to localize where these radio bursts come from. And that will help us determine from among 4 different hypotheses what is more likely or less likely to be true about what's happening. Like, is it related to a shock wave as this solar flare goes out? Is it related to the turbulence behind the shock wave? We don't know, but understanding that will be a key piece of what we're doing. And so that's the science goal. And that's again, like I think one thing that I see as being really important for us here on Earth, and for human exploration into deep space, understanding these events is hugely important as well. But also, one of the fun things about Sunrise is that all the data that we collect, and we're basically always on, always observing, all the data that we collect is going to be given to the public. And so when, while we're looking at the sun, we already have student groups who are interested in looking at Jupiter and looking at the space weather of Jupiter. We're already interested in looking at galactic sources, like doing like deep space, deep sky astronomy, and all of that from one platform, that we just happen to be doing for looking at the sun. But in terms of the Sunrise mission itself, we are currently furiously in the middle of phase B. We're about to go through one of our big reviews, the integrated design review. Sorry about the car horn there. In a few months, we'll be starting in phase C, which is starting to actually build the spacecraft and starting to put them all together. And then from there, it's only a few short years. Our launch readiness is in 2023, with a launch and start of on-orbit operations no later than 2024. So this is actually, to kind of get back to Terry's question earlier, Sunrise is actually a relatively quick mission for JPL. We'll be put together quickly, we'll be on orbit, and we'll start operations quickly. And so it's a relatively fast one. But it's still going to take several years, right? And I'm looking forward to when I think about the time my baby son is ready to start, preschool, is about when we'll actually be doing these missions and we're actually flying it. So it'll be, I'm sure, a busy time for me.
Yeah, I love the fact that all these science missions are so critical for us from a human exploration standpoint, because these are the kinds of things that we need to do to understand the environment that we're putting people in, and we still have so many things we got to figure out, right? And so I just love the fact that science and human exploration we're kind of hand in glove in this, trying to figure it out and working it together. So
absolutely,
really cool.
And that's to get to the question that Terry asked me earlier. One of those things, how do you keep interest in this is keeping that long-term perspective. And absolutely, like, I love the fact that I'm working on a science mission that's also helping human exploration. That's just so cool for me. So
I thank you both for that. I was going to make a joke, Kathy, about the lettuce, but Jeff beat me to it. FYI, I'm allergic to chocolate, so if you get the lettuce that tastes like chocolate, please call me. I'm going to turn over to Terry again, and to Terry, if you have another question for one of our panelists.
Oh, sure, Tamara. As Kathy said a little bit ago, exploring space in an international way is such an important thing. I'd even go a little bit further. I'd suggest that a couple hundred years from now, historians may look back upon this time and say one of the most important things that came out of space exploration was its natural ability to bring people together around the world. And so in that sense, Julia's in the middle of communications and developing new capabilities in Europe, and And I like to ask her about the leadership aspects of that, and what that would bring to the table with European partners.
Julia, are you talking?
Maybe you on mute, maybe?
Uh-oh. Okay. No, I don't hear you, Julia. Okay. All right. So, Julia, I think you've got a mic thing happening. Maybe you can unplug the mic and plug it back in again. And let's see if that'll get you back on track. So I'm going to see if Kathy wants to offer a question to Bethany while Julia gets her mic back working.
Sure. So Bethany, communications and public outreach are the last step in a long chain of decisions and activities that at NASA and ESA. And so as ESA's Chief Communication Officer for the Hubble telescope, how did you engage in that process early enough to be effective without overstepping your boundaries?
Yeah, great question. I think, communications and outreach is a well-oiled machine, but it's something that's very dynamic. So we're always trying to find ways to improve it. And even though in our job titles and in the domain of work we do, it's called public outreach or external communications, I think that's made effective by internal communications and having the strong network within and understanding what our roles are. I mean, I respect the role of the scientists. They're the ones that are using the telescope, collecting the data, analyzing the data, and publishing the results. So I like to say that my role, I know it to be translating English to English. When they're producing their papers, it's aimed for an academic, a scientific audience, but our role is to help amplify their results and to bring it to a public audience. So I'm there to support their work, the work that they've done, the discoveries they've made, the images they've captured. It's my role to help them and bring that to a broader audience. And when I say translating English to English, it just means finding creative ways to do that, whether it's through text or videos and graphics. That's what makes it fun. And in terms of not overstepping boundaries, I think that comes from not only having a well-established team and a means of doing the work, but when I talk about internal communications within that, it means that I have strong relationships with the people that I'll be working with. I know for example, the European scientists, if they have a story they know might be coming up, they're working on a paper, they'll give me a heads up. But I understand that they know the science best, and it's just my role to help amplify that work for them. And it's always a very interactive project in terms of producing a press release to make sure that we've written it in accessible language for a public audience, but also we've not left out the important scientific and technical details that make the result what it is. So it's a lot of back and forth. We work on the visuals together to make sure that it's something that the public can understand, but again, holds that scientific value. So it's challenging, but also fun. I'm never bored. I'm always learning. And I think it's quite a fun and niche area of working in space, is bringing that bridge from those that are working in the technology and science areas of space and bringing it to broader audiences so that it can be enjoyed and understood and ultimately valued as well.
Thank you so much, Bethany. Yeah, I see Julia's looking like her mic is working. Are you here? Can we hear you? Nope, still don't hear you. Oh, fudge and fiddle faddle. Okay, well, technology is technology. So Julia, what I'm going to ask you to do is we're going to keep going with the conversation. As soon as your mic decides to work, just say hello and we'll get you right into the conversation. So I'm wanting to hear from you, but I don't know if I can. So, but with that, Bethany, you have a question for one of our Hall of Famers, if I can turn to you.
Absolutely. So I have a question for Terry. So an amazing career. And after your retirement from Laurel Skynet back in 2014, you moved in as a professor of mechanical engineering. And I'm curious to learn a bit about that transition into education after the long and varied career you had, and what that was like, and maybe more about what led you into it.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, actually, it was 2004. It's like all this gray hair. I really, yeah, I'm a technologist at heart. I mean, I was a Air Force fighter pilot, and I had the good fortune of flying in the shuttle and all that kind of stuff. But I grew up as a young lad, fascinated by mechanical and electrical things. So I always kind of wanted to gravitate back toward that as a discipline. And teaching, of course, is a wonderful way to do that. So I was actually planning on transitioning out of industry at a young enough age that I could make that switch over into academia, because it is a bit of a challenge. I mean, you may know this, you may think you know the subject pretty well, but when you go to teach it, of course, it requires a whole another set of skills that you have to develop. I kind of equate it to writing a book. And every time you teach a new class, it's like writing a book to get everything organized. And then, of course, there's all the fun. Our students today are just remarkable, and that they're so quick to learn, and they ask the darndest questions, sometimes. But that's that's all the fun of it. And like I said earlier to Jeff, I mean, I get the extra benefit of watching them all go off into industry, and I can vicariously. My one student graduated back in 2014. She's at JPL she was working Mars 2020, which became Perseverance, and Europa Clipper at the same time, and all throughout NASA and the contractors. Of course, I have former students that tell me about all the wonderful things they're doing. So yeah, so I highly recommend teaching to anyone that really does like the technology aspect. It's a way to kind of keep young. Even as your hair gets more and more gray at my age. So yeah, thank you for that question.
No, hold on. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Tamara.
Yeah, I just found out that we've got Julia by phone so that we can finally hear her. Julia, are you there? Okay, you're on mute.
All right, can you hear me?
There you are. Yes, we can.
I made it. Thank you very much for helping me through this.
Thank you for persisting. Yeah.
All right. So first of all, I was starting to say earlier, thank you to Terry for the question, because it was very interesting how to connect with the community and the space sector. And this is very important, especially for a startup to connect, because you cannot navigate this environment without knowing where you're going. So it's very important to know where a startup is, where peer startups are, but also where the whole sector is going, and also how the sector interlaces with other sectors as well, because development is not only within the sector, but it's also connected to what benefits the citizens. So organizing events, organizing webinars, being connected with your network is very important. And it's not only important as a startup to achieve your goals, but it's also important to connect with others and give back to the sectors, because creative ideas, connections across the different verticals of space, but also across sectors connections. These are all beautiful events that happens only thanks to communication. When somebody comes up with an idea or a new development, the other knows thanks to communication. So this is the key for us to go ahead to create the future, but also to give back to our peers. A lot of collaborations happens because somebody came up with an idea and communicated to it, or information are passed along. So there are projects that are born thanks to that information. So I would say that it's a privilege to organize communication events always, but also as a startup, it's very interesting both for the business, but also to be connected to the environment and the ecosystem.
Thank you so much. I'm looking at our time, and I'm being really super sensitive to it. We're coming right up at the end of it. I'm going to just ask for, well, I'm going to take the privilege of saying one last thing, and I'm sorry, Julia, that we had such difficulty here, so I'm cutting you off too. But I just was listening to the conversation about the connection between the science and the communication. And so this is me making a shameless plug for SSPI. We did a new thing this past March, where we started also making the connection between the science, space and satellite science, and the arts. And that goal of communicating internally and externally, the value is what I've heard from all of you, without exception. And so I'm very grateful for that. And if anyone wants to say like one word, or okay, 2 words about the value of communicating popularly to the populace what we do, the floor is open, and then we'll close.
I don't know so much about communicating to the populace at large, but I do kind of want to hit on what you said about combining science and art. And that's actually something that through one of my side gigs at JPL, I kind of helped put together a seminar series about that. And the response from JPLers was actually quite overwhelming. Like, we had a lot of interest of people who they're passionate about science, they're passionate about their engineering, their technology, but they also want to view it in more creative ways and more artistic ways, for lack of a better way of putting it. So there's obviously a deep human connection, not just to understanding our world, but to finding the beauty in it as well. And to the extent that I can talk about talking to the public, that's what I try to do. I try to show not just the practical outcomes, like lettuce that tastes like chocolate. That's quite practical and wonderful, but also like what's beautiful about it, what it means for us in a deeper emotional level. I mean, maybe to come back to the lettuce tasting like chocolate, what about chocolate is it that actually makes us love it so much, right? I think there's something deep there.
The human
and I wish I
experience.
had the training to really explore it more.
Well, and why do we need green? Why was the plant so important? Because there's a reason why we're trying to figure out how to grow things. It's because there's this very deep connection that we have with our planet.
Yeah,
and it's very strong, and it's one of the huge health benefits that we found out is that seeing things grow is actually one of the things that, it connects people. And so when you don't learn about the wonderful things on this planet until it's taken away. And you should hear crew members talk about watching plants grow and how much that means to them, or or how much a window means to them, to make you realize really what we have. And art helps us connect in that way too, right? So what we're trying to do is to bring this reality of what we have and the beauty of what we have around us to everybody, and really recognizing and appreciating that. Nothing does that like going someplace where it's not. So,
Thank you. Last word to Julia, because she got the least amount of time to chat. Last word.
Well, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. I think, it is very important to communicate, and sometimes we take things for granted when we work in the sector. And I very much agree with Katie when you hear about crew members talking about their experience up there. It's fascinating, but also images are fascinating. I've seen a lot of exhibitions about images taken from space, and the expressions of people going through this exhibition, and the questions that pop in their mind are always so unexpected. I've seen many of them, and there is always that one question I don't expect. And this is the beauty of it, that this can create such a reflective moment, and it's never over. We always learn something new, something that is unexpected.
Okay. I want to thank everyone. We're having thunderstorms here, and besides the fact that I am terrified of them, we also are having some technical challenges because of it. So I am now going to turn the floor over to Mr. Robert Bell. I thank you all for participating in this conversation. I wish we had more time. I want to let everybody know that the 20 under 35 from 2020 did a video with me called Space for All. I encourage you all to find it on our website and check it out because they are awesome. And so with that, Mr. Bell. Let's see what I can do here. Let's see. How about that? Yes.
So, thank you for your patience with technical difficulties. As members of our panels have been able to attest, it's just kind of how things work. I want to thank you, Tamara, and thanks to all of our panelists for sharing their insights with us. And thanks to all of you who attended our second Leadership in Turbulent Times conference, all the speakers for all the issues that they and insights that they provided to us about a very critical topic, and a topic that's never going to go out of fashion, which is how to be an effective leader in the world's most demanding technology business. I invite you to join us on July 8th for a webinar presented by the new Canada chapter of SSPI. We'll hear a keynote on disruptive innovation from that notable expert, Christy Damien of Adventech Wireless, followed by a roundtable discussion and online networking in breakout rooms. Believe me, you will not want to miss it. And then on October 5th, after we come back from the break, SSPI will be at the Satellite Innovation Show in Mountain View, California for the return of our Future Leaders Dinner. And there you will meet this year's 20 under 35 young leaders and our mentor of the year, selected by a panel of SSPI members from your nominations. We'll also eat, drink, and network our brains out, but that's part of the course. It's always one of my favorite events on the calendar, and I hope to see you there. So thanks again to Artel and AVL Technologies for underwriting our series. Programs like this are made possible by the support of SSPI's corporate members and sponsors. So if you've taken away something meaningful from today, I encourage you to become one. To learn more, go to sspi.org and click on Member Network at the top of the page. For SSPI, this is Robert Bell.